if you asked some central planner what is the socially optimal number of units of every good in society to produce and consume, which is actually a mechanism by which a big chunk of the human population over the last 100 years or so has been organized, right? So if you go back, I think I mentioned this crazy example. If you go back to June 22nd of 1941, everybody knows what happened on June 22nd, 1941, right? You know, don't you? Germany invaded Russia. Germany invaded the Soviet Union. At the time, now you would have, everybody knew this was about to happen, except Joseph Stalin. You would have thought that a centrally planned economy, which is what the Soviet Union was, would have been frantically producing what? Oh, say, guns, tanks, right? Instead, what they were doing was that they were putting a huge amount of effort into producing ice cream. Okay? Go figure. The thing that would make it possible, that's a bad example, the thing that would make it possible for a central planner, a commissar is what they were referred to, there were all these commissariats that made these economic allocation decisions, you would need to know how much does each good cost, right? What is it going to cost society to produce each unit of ice cream or of bread or, skirts, pants, etc., and how much will it benefit people, right? And you somehow need to find some way of getting that information out of everybody in society so that you could weigh the trade-offs between, hey, should we make another 1 million pairs of boots, or is there just the slightest possibility that we're kind of short on socks, right? And the way that the information that you would need is benefits and costs. Well, that's exactly the information that is conveyed silently, right? This is the invisible hand of the market. The thing that markets do is that they convey information about costs and benefits. Okay? So this is rather fabulous. Now, if you look at the assumptions that we've just laid down, where were they? Okay? Each of these really has to do with conveying information. Okay? If there's a firm that has market power, then the price that they charge no longer conveys useful information about the costs that they incur when they produce that good, right? Because they're pricing far above their marginal cost. So the information aggregating function of the market breaks down. And that's the guts of why, that's the real explanation of why the market is no longer efficient. Okay, why there's deadweight loss. This one's obvious, right? If buyers and sellers have imperfect information, then that's obvious why in that case the market cannot fulfill the desired role of conveying the right information about which units are optimal and which ones aren't. And similarly, if there are externalities in either production or consumption, the price that the consumers are willing to pay does not convey the benefits to society of each unit of the good, right? The price I'm willing to pay for a gallon of gasoline reflects the value to me of being able to get to the place that gallon of gasoline is going to get me. It does not reflect the cost to the rest of society of having to breathe the fumes from my scooter, right? It also doesn't include the benefit that people get for seeing me drive around a flashy scooter. Again, the problem is information. The problem is a breakdown in the information aggregating and conveying function of the market. Now, the power of markets to convey information is profound, and it is something that we don't want to let go of. It's an amazing phenomenon, okay? But there are all kinds of situations in which it doesn't work as well as we would like, okay? So, again, we don't actually worry about this. We move on from, like, what is it? You see this in about week 7 of 100A, typically. And then in week 8, you see the model of a monopoly and what to do about it, and the model of an externality and what to do about it. And we move on into what is referred to as market failure, right? The study of market failure. So if one or more of assumptions A through C is not true, what do we get? For example, if the assumption about consumption externalities fails, we use the gasoline example, we have a negative externality in consumption, what happens? So here's the question for you. Next clicker question is on this diagram. So this is a diagram of, say, a market for gasoline. And what I've got here is, this is the demand curve. Whoops. This is the demand curve, which is people's willingness to pay. It's the marginal private benefit. But then there's this cost to society because everyone has to breathe the fumes, so the marginal social benefit curve is below. And the question is, which of those 3 areas represents the deadweight loss caused by the externality? So take a minute with that question. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2. Good? Oh, got it. All right. So the bulk of you say that it's either 2 or 3. Okay. So nobody said A. What is A? Sorry, Andrew? It's the social welfare. It's sort of like the actual benefit that society is receiving net of the cost if society was at the socially optimal point. Who wants to, let's see, do I want to do this? I think I don't. I think I'm just going to let those answers sit, and I'm going to walk you through some steps. So the correct answer is C. So let me walk you through getting there. Actually, no, don't forget I said that. You don't know what the correct answer is. What I'm about to do is something that, personally, how do I want to say this? Being able to answer this question is one of the more fundamental things that you should expect yourself to be able to do with a degree in economics, with a bachelor's degree in economics. Because basically what this is doing is it's saying, I've learned this model. You all knew what was going on with the basic model, right? That was straightforward. The question is, beyond that, can you actually do some work with this model to get some kind of handle on what might actually be true in the real world? Because the basic model isn't the real world, and we actually care about the real world. The way we get there is we start with the simplest possible model, and we start relaxing assumptions, and you need to be able to walk through the steps of what's called normative analysis. Well, first it's positive, and then there's a positive stage analysis, and then a normative stage analysis. You need to be able to come out of here with a very, very rigorous and generalizable set of guidelines or steps for how do I actually use this modeling technique to predict what will happen under certain circumstances, and then to do the normative analysis of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, because this is the kind of back-of-the-envelope stuff that you can do. Do any of you know the crosstown taxi test? Okay, so if we teach students this, but we used to anyway, in public policy analysis, that in order to have your analysis actually make a difference in the world of public policy, in the world of actual public decision making, you should be able to explain it to a taxi driver in a crosstown taxi across Manhattan. Okay, which takes how long? 35 minutes, that's a lot of traffic. A few minutes, let's say. You should be able to get into a taxi and explain to a assuming that the taxi driver speaks English or your language. You should be able to say, and the point is that these diagrams, right, you do the analysis, the diagram and your understanding of the diagram ought to be a taxi talk. Right? This is how you should be able to inform political discourse, if nothing else. So let me walk you through. I want to leave you, this has nothing to do with behavioral economics, but I want to leave you, if nothing else, with a way that you can always be certain of getting the right answer in situations like this, and then you're going to use it in the context of behavioral economics as well. All right, so Ackland's steps. How do I identify deadweight loss in supply and demand, any supply and demand diagram for any kind of government intervention or market failure? The first step is to build the model. Okay, now a model involves making various simplifications. The first thing we do when we're building a model is we make a whole bunch of prepackaged assumptions about how economic allocation is done in markets, and those assumptions boil down to production decisions are made on the basis of a supply curve, and consumption decisions are made on the basis of a demand curve. So that's the first thing you always do. There are decisions to be made here. In particular, should the supply curve be upward sloping or flat, or maybe even conceivably downward sloping? By and large, we go with a simple assumption that it's upward sloping, but it's not always true. Demand, we always assume is downward sloping. But we're building a model. This is not how the real world is. There's nothing fundamentally true about this. We're building a model. In order to do, sorry, I should be doing this here. Okay, so we have a supply curve and a demand curve. In order to be able to do the full analysis, we need a full model. Okay, so we need to know what marginal private benefit and marginal private cost are if we have reason to think that they are different from supply and demand. Okay, now we're talking here about a pollution externality. We're not talking about a case of imperfect information. But if we had a case of imperfect information, we might, for example, in the case of the Bucky cubes, want to say the actual benefit to the individual who buys the Bucky cubes, on average, is lower than the demand curve because there's this hidden cost that most consumers don't take into consideration when they make their purchase decisions, which is that their kids may die, or whatever it is that happens to you when you have magnets in your intestines. If nothing else, it's the cost of the surgery. So you need to. So that would be a case where you would say, oh, I'm going to draw in a demand curve, a shadow demand curve, a marginal private benefit curve that's actually below the willingness to pay or demand curve. In this case, we're assuming that that's not what's going on, but there is an externality. So the next thing you need to do is to model. Sorry, let me actually do this. We'll call that marginal private cost, right? So this is us building our model. We have decided that we've made simplifying assumptions about perfect information that allow us to say that the supply curve and the demand curve are the marginal private cost and marginal private benefit curves. And the last part of the model we need to build is to find some representation of the marginal social benefit and the marginal social cost. Okay? We're assuming away. This whole thing is built out of simplifying assumptions. We're assuming away externalities in production. Now, in fact, with gasoline, there are externalities in production, but we're going to assume that away, and we're going to say that the first order approximation, the supply curve is also equal to the marginal social cost. But we have this issue where there's a negative externality on the consumption side, right? And so what we do is we say, sometimes we refer to this as a shadow demand curve. You shouldn't. What you should do is you should simply say, I'm modeling the marginal social benefit curve as being below the marginal private benefit curve by the amount of the marginal external cost. MC sub E is how that's often written. Okay? That's just building the model. Just build the model. Okay? If you like the assumptions that went into building this model, then you can do some work with this model with reasonable confidence. Now we do the positive part of the analysis. Okay? What will actually happen in reality? What will actually happen in reality is that supply will equal demand, right? The quantity supplied will be equal to the quantity demanded, sorry, it's over here, which is here, right? Markets are driven, except in the case of monopoly, markets are driven by the willingness of firms, well, they're always driven by the willingness of firms to sell and the willingness of consumers to buy, and if there's no market power, if there's no monopoly or oligopoly, that's the willingness to sell and the willingness to pay are going to be represented by these two curves, and the equilibrium will be there for reasons that you all could definitely explain in the first block of the taxi ride. Okay? So we've now identified the market quantity. Okay? That's where the market will get us to. Sorry, I like to do star for equilibrium, but I actually want to call it Q market, NKT. Next step. So I say usually that's the intersection of supply and demand. In the case of monopoly, it isn't. Next, now we're going to step into the normative stage of the analysis. Right? Now what we want to do is identify in this diagram what the socially optimal outcome would be. Okay? And that, of course, is at the intersection of the marginal social cost curve and the marginal social benefit curve, which is here. Okay? That's Q opt. Why? Because the social welfare maximization rule is to produce and consume every unit for which the benefits are greater than the costs. And that's where that's true. Everything beyond that, the social cost is greater than the social benefit. Okay? Step 4. This may seem like this is a vacuous step. Identify the suboptimal units. Okay, the optimal units, these are ones we're happy about. Okay, we don't have any problem with those units. Units above market, those aren't in play. We don't have to worry about those. What we care about is the cost to society of the suboptimal units. That's to say, either units that, in this case, are produced and consumed, which shouldn't have been, and in other cases, you will find underconsumption units that weren't produced and consumed that should have been. Right. So this is were produced and consumed but shouldn't have been, and in other cases, you have overconsumption, overproduction, which would be. God, I'm getting confused. I said it once right. Go with that. Having done all of that, right, now we know that our normative analysis is right in here. Okay? These are the suboptimal units. Suboptimal. Those are the ones we care about. And now from here, see, usually students get very wrapped around the axle trying to figure out where's consumer surplus and how to change, where's producer surplus and how to change. That's fine, but if you want a quick and dirty method that will always get you straight to the right answer without getting confused over, well, there was this red triangle and then it turned into this purple trapezoid, just find the suboptimal units and ask yourself, where's the area between the social marginal benefit and social marginal cost curve? Okay? Here's the marginal social cost curve. Here's the marginal social, sorry, I mean that wrong, forget that. Here's the marginal social cost curve. Here's the marginal social benefit curve. Okay? So now you've identified for each of these suboptimal units what was going on. What was going on in this case is that the cost to society of producing those units was greater than the benefit to society of consuming them. That's what deadweight loss is in the case of overconsumption. Okay? So that was 3. Oops. I think I want to say one more thing about that. No. Okay. So we have these 3 assumptions A through C. When those are violated, we say there's a market failure. Neoclassical economists started studying market failure with monopoly in the 1930s, actually earlier than that, and moved on to externalities, I want to say in the 50s and 60s, and then into imperfect information, starting with George Akerlof's Nobel Prize-winning Market for Lemons paper in 1971. We've been down these roads. Okay, we are comfortable with this stuff. This is now, we're not bummed about any of this stuff. We know what to do. When we have one of these market failures, right, it means that markets don't maximize social welfare, which means that markets are inefficient. Then the implication from that, the policy implication, is that government regulation can potentially fix these market failures. We say that there's a prima facie reason to consider government intervention. Okay? It doesn't mean that the government will make things better. It says there's a possibility here that we might be able to think of a way for government to make things better. Okay? And what we love is that, the standard model actually tells us how to do it. Right? We can actually go back into the model and we can say, hey, look, we're in this situation. So this is, where am I? So this is the situation where here's where the market gets us to. This is just, you don't have to write this down if you don't want to. I'm just repeating what was on the last slide, in case you do have to write it down. So we're in the situation here where what we want to do as a society, our goal, right, is to get from the suboptimal market equilibrium down to something that we might think of as the socially optimal outcome. How do we do that? Well, this model, right, if you just extend this line up to here, this model tells you that if you were to get there, it would have to be the case that there's a difference between the price that consumers pay and the price that producers receive, right? In order to get to that point, you would have to be producing and consuming a quantity, right? These quantities have to be the same in a clearing market. It would have to be the case that somehow you have a situation where the price paid by consumers, right, P demand, would be greater than the price paid by the price received by suppliers, P sub S, and in particular, it would have to be greater by exactly the marginal external cost. Well, we know from years of experience going back well before neoclassical economics how to drive a wedge between the price producers receive and the price consumers pay, which is what? Taxes, okay? So this goes all the way back to Pigou, I think, in the 20s or 30s. So this is a Pigouian tax. And the model, right? The point is that the model shows us what to do, right? So this is a very powerful tool. Why it might be Higgs-Calder efficient but not Pareto efficient? It can't be. If something's Higgs-Calder efficient, by definition, it's Pareto efficient. Where did I say that? Oh, always Higgs-Calder inefficient, sometimes Pareto inefficient. So something can be, right? Something can be Pareto efficient without being Higgs-Calder efficient. There might be a way. Right, okay, so the example is a monopoly. So if you go from the sort of market outcome of a monopoly to the socially optimal outcome, you're increasing Higgs-Calder welfare, right? Because you're going from underproduction to optimal production, but the firm is losing out because the firm is losing its monopoly profits. So that's a situation where the market failure creates a Pareto efficient outcome, but it's not Higgs-Calder efficient. Okay? Yeah. If that didn't make sense to you, talk to me afterwards. Or Yvonne, right? Your name is Yvonne. Talk to Yvonne afterwards. And I'll give you a cut of my pay. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so you impose a Pigouian tax such that. Now, you can look at this and you can say, oh yeah, Pigouian tax just set it equal to the marginal external cost. Has anybody ever observed the dollar value of the cost of a unit of gasoline pollution? No, we don't know, but we know which direction we need to go in, okay? And we can then attempt to put, and people do, I mean, if you come and take my benefit cost analysis class when you get into a master's program in public policy, you're all planning to apply for a master's program in public policy, right? It's fabulous, you can ask Maura. Does everyone know? Maura is auditing a class from public policy. Eventually I'm going to colonize the public policy program of behavioral economics. So not only does the model tell us in some abstract sense what we should be doing, but in fact, it guides us to go out and do quantitative policy analysis, and people actually do go out and try to put a dollar value on the cost to individuals of having to breathe other people, particularly, say, for example, in the case of the particulate matter that comes from internal combustion engines, because particulate matter, soot, doesn't actually go up into the atmosphere and create climate change. What it does is it goes into people's lungs and creates asthma. So we can actually go and try to put a dollar value on the cost to the individuals who breathe that particular particulate matter using either some contingent valuation survey or some other kind of method, and then we can say, all right, we should impose a tax that's equal to that. Right? So we can take this model a step further and actually use it to come up with real recommendations on dollar values. And I've had students who've done that in my graduate class. Okay? So this leads us to this sort of inexorable logic of market failure that leads us by one more simple and I would argue not very controversial step to sort of behavioral economic public policy. Okay? So the standard model, as you know, makes two additional assumptions, that consumers rationally maximize utility and that firms rationally maximize profits. We've seen all kinds of situations where assumption D fails. We've also seen some situations where assumption E fails, right? Because we've seen supply-side actors doing things that are not rational. We've seen investors, right, doing myopic loss aversion. We've seen taxi drivers doing crazy things. The investors doing crazy things probably actually matters a lot. The cab drivers probably doesn't matter very much. But we see consumers doing all kinds of things that violate the assumption of rationality. And whether you think that's crazy or normal doesn't matter. It violates the model. Okay? And as with assumptions A through C, it is perfectly natural, if what we care about is how to use these models to determine what's good or bad for society, it's perfectly natural to ask what happens when these assumptions are violated. And we've asked that question a lot, but we're going to be more systematic about it now. Qualitatively, in what way will markets fail to maximize social welfare? And quantitatively, how much social welfare will be lost? Okay? So if we see people, for example, well, no, I'm not going to give you examples. And we can also use the models. The models will guide us in the direction of thinking about what public policy could potentially do to solve the problem. Okay, now I'm going to editorialize. Here's a totally uncontroversial statement.